Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. So this is drawing close to the end of this weekend retreat, and we've all had a lot of time to meditate, to do the inner work and exploration. And I hope that everybody found at least some parts of the time beneficial and the mind coming to some quiescence. Yesterday evening I spoke about the 5 hindrances. I think today I'm going to stay on the topic of meditation and just make some general remarks about the meditation practice and some of the challenges that we face in undertaking that practice. One of the difficulties that is pretty much universal, people experience discomfort and pain in the body, and it's often a struggle. The early beginning practice is often one of the first major challenges that people face, and it continues on. Even more experienced practitioners will still have difficulties with the body. So a number of things could be said about this. There are ways of working to try and minimize that, such as doing some stretching, particularly certain yoga poses, like the cobbler's pose is very helpful for sitting, and the seated hero's pose. And for prolonged sitting, if there's crampiness and discomfort in the legs, doing some upside down pose once or twice a day, either shoulder stand or headstand if you can manage it, to improve the circulation in the legs. And you can also work on posture when you're sitting. That's something that's very helpful. If you have a solid upright posture, then there's less strain on the back, and you can adjust your seat. Make sure you have a good meditation seat. You can experiment with different modes, and sometimes you may want to switch. For example, sitting on those Burmese-style kneeling benches, alternated with sitting on a cushion, or if it's difficult to sit on the floor all the time, to sit on a chair part of the time. If you're sitting in a chair, or if you're leaning your back against, supporting your back in any way, I would recommend that you find something to support the lower back just above the hips, a rolled up towel or a firm cushion on the lower back, so that's supported and the shoulders are not touching anything. That's a way of keeping an erect posture while seated in a chair. As for working on the physical apparatus of the seat, this is something that can be useful to put a little thought into it, but it can be something that's taken to extremes, and I've seen people make ridiculous contraptions and complex sort of multi-cushion thrones to sit on that really gets carried away. All this is helpful, but the last word on the body and meditation is that you really get through that and past that, not when the pain cease, but when you cease to let it matter. It's something to recognize that this is a human body. There'll always be some degree of suffering, of dukkha. It comes with the territories built into the equipment. The human body is always going to have some degree of of discomfort and suffering. What happens when we meditate, it seems to increase the suffering. It's just because we're not allowing ourselves to escape from it by fidgeting. Ordinarily in your daily life, you sit in your comfy chair at home, you'll be changing your posture, several times in an hour, shifting and moving, crossing your legs one way, then the other, leaning on the other elbow. We constantly do that as a way of disguising or hiding the dukkha. But if you sit still, it doesn't actually add suffering to the body, but you don't allow yourself to escape from it, so it seems much more intense. We come to recognize the pains as just sensations and just notice them and not allow the mind to become upset by them. And depending on what particular practice you're doing at the time, there's two general approaches. I've been emphasizing on this retreat this weekend the samatha, samadhi exercise, mindfulness of breathing. In that case, when we're trying to develop singleness of mind and deep samadhi, the correct approach is just to disregard extraneous objects like sensations in the body, to pay no heed to them, to try and develop a sort of knack of non-attention. That's a skill that some yogis find difficult if they've started, as I actually did many years ago. I started my meditation practice with a vipassana practice, where the correct approach is quite different. The correct approach in vipassana is not to miss anything, and everything is noticed. So one way of dealing with persistent pain as a method in vipassana is to focus on it and make that the object of meditation. And it's a difficult and tricky practice because at first it can seem to make the pain worse. And you also have to, for it to be effective, you have to give up wanting it to make the pain go away. That should, if it's goal driven that way, then it's not going to work. And it comes then to the point where the pain doesn't matter. It's just seen as a sensation, neutrally. If you're doing samatha practice, and the samatha is good, it actually can be a escape from physical pain. The body can become less evident, put aside. And, the Buddha spoke about this in his last year of his life, when he was suffering from illness, he only was free of pain when he was in jhana. And what happens, of course everybody's different, but a very common progress in meditation is the meditator first comes to get on the other side of suffering with pain and think, oh good, and then they immediately start falling asleep. This is often the very next thing that happens. So this is the next sort of struggle, is maintaining wakefulness. We spoke a bit about sloth and torpor yesterday. It's something that can be very persistent and difficult to deal with if you have dullness, sleepiness in meditation. And it's, first of all, to be noted that in the list of the 5 faculties, energy is paired with samadhi. They're complementary opposites, and they to be developed in tandem, meaning one, not to let one get out of balance with the other, not to be overdeveloped on one side. So what this means in practice, if you're sleepy, is the last thing you need at that point is more samadhi. If there's no energy behind it, the samadhi becomes kind of hypnotic and puts you into sleepy, dreamy states, which can even be sort of pleasant at times, but it's not spiritually progressive. It's not conducive. So the Thais call this the Bow Bandha. The mind is just drifted into its kind of semi-conscious, dark, dull state. You need to rouse energy. So don't worry about being so focused and so one-pointed at that time. If you're sleepy, that's not the thing to worry about. The thing to pay attention to is to wake up and energize. So that's first of all good posture. And that means primarily keeping the back straight and the head up. But there are other little tricks you can use with posture. One of them is a hand mudra. If you have the right hand seated on the left and the thumbs lightly touching, that's helpful if you're sleepy, because that requires a small amount of muscular effort to keep the thumbs up. And if you start to nod off or doze, your thumbs will fall apart first, and it's like an early warning sign. Oh, I've got to smarten up here. Another trick from Tibetan tradition is it's like a acupressure point or a chakra activation, is to curl the tongue backwards in the mouth and press the tip of the tongue against the palate as far back as you can comfortably reach, and hold it like that. And that's supposed to set up a kind of a circuit in the energetic system. Energize you. The Buddha actually mentioned in one sutta, he's talking to Moggallana, who's was his chief disciple for psychic powers, and in his early on, falling asleep in meditation was his primary problem when he first ordained, and the Buddha gave him all kinds of advice. And one of the things the Buddha said was, pull your earlobes. So I think that's another like acupressure idea. You just give a little tug on the earlobes. He also said, go outside and look at the stars, or splash your face in cold water. One that is very effective, not this time of year, but is very effective here, is go outside and walk a little bit barefoot in the snow. That wakes you up very quickly. Yeah. So, find, and don't worry about, this isn't conducive to my samadhi. Don't worry about your samadhi so much if you're sleepy. You need to wake up first, and then you develop the samadhi with energy behind it. It's much more effective. So, sleepiness. Another universal issue people have is what in Thai tradition they often call monkey mind. The restless mind that's constantly moving around, jumping around from thought to emotion to memory to daydream, and just won't keep quiet. This is a natural state of the unrestrained mind. And I've seen several times people doing their first, if they're doing their first intensive retreat, and they've not meditated much before, very often around day 3 or 4, they'll come and tell me, Ajahn, I think I'm going crazy. I think I'm going mad. And you ask them to explain what they're experiencing, and it's like their mind is just jabbering away and constantly making noise, and they can't have any peace at all. I love the description. One woman said, it's like there's half a dozen radios in my cabin, and they're all fading in and out of different stations all the time. This is the kind of monkey mind. And what's happened to these meditators is it's not anything new. Their mind just hasn't suddenly flipped. It's just they've now become, for the first time in their life, they've become conscious of it. And when you realize what a mess your mind is, then that's the first step to begin to straighten it out. And I heard somebody once say they'd really like to develop the psychic power of reading minds. And so why would you want to do that? Don't you have enough trouble with your own mind? You want all that you want all that other nonsense too, other people's garbage. So, if you look at it, if you look at your mind consciously, and the thinking, and this is also something very important to understand, is that the thinking is different than the consciousness. It's different than the knowing. The thinking is an object of the knowing. And you can look at the thinking process from a place of calmness. And if you do that, you see it's mostly just nonsense. It's mostly of not any significance. So with the mindfulness of breathing practice, we try and make the thoughts quiescent by focusing on this calming, repetitive bodily process of the breath that doesn't involve thinking and is there all the time, whether we're noticing it or not. As long as we're alive, we're breathing. Just notice that breath going in and out. It's very calm and peaceful. And as with the bodily sensations, the correct approach in summative practice is to disregard the thoughts, pay no attention to them. It's compared to having a stray dog come yapping around, and if you feed it or pet it, pay attention to it, it'll stay, it'll keep hanging around. But if you just ignore it, it'll yap a few times and then wander off looking for somebody else. So don't pay any attention to the thoughts. Now, with Vipassana, it's again different, that we notice the thought as an object. From a point of view of the citta, of knowing, we see the thought process happening. And the proper noticing in Vipassana is to see the thought as an impersonal process of dependently arisen. And a very good advice that comes from one of the Western meditation teachers is to focus on the process, not the content. Don't get caught in the content of the thought. Meaning that, there'll be thoughts about the past, thoughts about the future, fantasies, anxieties. It doesn't matter. It's just thinking process. And don't let the story grab you. It's possible with Vipassana to get the mind so peaceful that the thinking process just about ceases, that you notice the intention to think before the thought arises. You see the mind starting to move towards thought. There's not yet any content. There's not a thought about anything. It's starting to form. You can see it sort of like bubbling up, and then you notice that, and it doesn't go any further. In the jhana practice, the thinking process only ceases completely in second jhana. So there's a famous saying from one of our monks that talks about jhana a lot. He says, if you find yourself wondering, am I in second jhana? The answer is no. There is a subtle difference in thoughts about the past and thoughts about the future. I first encountered this idea in Ajahn Buddhadasa, and I think it has a lot of merit. That thoughts about the past, you're dealing with something that is fixed. That the narrative of the past is a story that's already happened. It's fixed. Thoughts about the future are open-ended. They're speculation or fantasy, and they have no basis in reality at all. So there's a subtle difference in dealing with them. If the mind is in the past, there's still some samadhi present, but it's on the wrong object. You still have some focus in the mind, but it's focusing on the wrong thing. So you can just very gently pay attention to the breath, just shift it. If the mind's gone into the future or into an unreal fantasy world, it's lost the samadhi altogether, and you have to reestablish it. So in terms of the jhana factors we talked about yesterday, you apply vitakka. You make a strong intention in the mind to turn the mind to the breath. So it's a little bit more forceful to break. You have to re-establish. You're like beginning again at that point. Whereas when the mind's gone into the past, you don't really have to begin again. You just have to shift sideways and come back to the proper object. You talk about the past, present, and future. There's a couple of things could be said about that. One is a saying from Tibetan yoga of the three times. The past is unreal because it has ceased to be. The future is unreal because it is not yet manifest. And the present is unreal because it cannot be fixed. Meaning as soon as you look at it, it's the past. Yeah. Another thing to contemplate about times is that the concept of self only exists in relation to the past or future. When we identify a self, ordinarily in the world, if someone asks you who you are, you'll say your name, which was something given to you shortly after birth, so it's like a past acquisition, and maybe you might say where you live or where you work, where you go to school, all these things like your history. So there's built up an identity around your history. Or internally, if you can project the self into the future, thinking about your hopes and ambitions or your fears and worries. You're jumping into the future. But if you take the present moment, is that the narrowest single moment, razor edge, right here, right now. There's no room for a self. What is the self? What am I? This doesn't make any sense. There's nothing to identify to. So it's good in any kind of meditation to try and stay in the present moment. Try and avoid letting the mind drift into thoughts of past and future. They're not productive, they're not conducive, they're just diversions. Maybe the last one I'll go into a bit. Last challenge or difficulty in meditation is restlessness. And this is something that can come after you get past sleepiness, and you get restless, you get twitchy. And it's the opposite of sleepiness. It's an excess of energy and a deficiency of samadhi. And in a broad sense, whenever we're meditating, if we are not perfectly balanced on the middle path, we're sliding off into either restlessness, an excess of energy, or sleepiness, a deficiency of energy. So finding that balance of right effort is very important. Now the thing about restlessness is you never overcome restlessness by appeasing it. And this is something the mind will come up with 101 reasons why you need to be doing something else. And if that's coming from restlessness, you just have to not pay attention. The only way to overcome restlessness is to sit still through it. You know, what's needed is more samadhi, meaning more singleness of mind, more stillness. Stillness of body, stillness of mind. And it can be difficult when you have restlessness. The body it can be felt in the body as kind of twitchiness, and in the mind in the impulse to do something, or to even just mentally to have build projects in the mind. But you don't overcome restlessness ever. I mean, people make that mistake. They're on a retreat and they're suffering a great deal of restlessness, difficult sitting still. So they tell themselves, well, maybe I'll go for a long walk and afterwards I'll feel better, I'll be able to meditate. You know, that does not overcome the restlessness. It just feeds it, and they're still suffering more. If you're sleepy, then going for a long walk might be helpful. You know? So it's not, you have to apply the right medicine for the cure the state of mind. And this is where mindfulness comes in, knowing where you're at. And restlessness means you need to sit still, you need to restrain the senses, you need to stop looking around, you stop, if you're doing walking meditation, do it very slowly and with eyes downcast. So, I've covered a few bases of challenges that one might face in meditation. I'm sure there's many more that I haven't got to or thought of, but I think I'll stop there for now.
Sadhu, 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 anumodham.
Again, the general rule of thumb is if you're hurting, you soldier through it. Does that apply to joints, knees?
Oh yeah, that's a good, I'm glad you brought that up because that's an important point. I think knees are important to kind of baby them because there's a delicate joint. And I have known two people, one was a monk and one was a laywoman, who injured their knee so badly by sitting in full lotus even though it hurt. They just soldiered through it. They end up tearing something and having to get surgery. This happened twice in my knowledge, just in my personal circle. So I think, particularly if it's like a sharp pain, that's telling you, okay, something's wrong here, and you need to not try to be a hero, but to change your posture and ease the pressure on the knee. I think the back is different. When you get pains in the back, unless the exception would be if you've got something medically wrong with your back, like you've got some, slip disc or something. But if your back is reasonably healthy, pains in the back are nothing to be concerned about in meditation. They're just kind of, it might be, at most, it might be a sign that your posture is not straight. You need to straighten your posture more, but often it's just kind of, karmic or, unavoidable dukkha, and you just have to sit through it.